Why was a pristine mountain lake sold to me for pennies? And what was the HOA hiding for 40 years? I only meant to put up a simple sign on the lake I'd just bought. Then the HOA called the police and claimed I'd stolen my own property. They had no idea I'd found a federal marker they'd buried for 70 years, or that a former treasurer was ready to expose everything. This was the moment the truth rose to the surface. By the time the first sheriff's cruiser rolled around the curve, the lake was already on fire with sunset. Crystal Mill Lake always did that in the evenings. The water turned this impossible sheet of molten turquoise, catching the last light between pine trunks and snow-capped ridges. The old wooden watermill on the right side of the cove creaked softly as the wheel turned, throwing silver spray into the air. A narrow stone bridge arched out from the shore just past the mill, its worn blocks damp and cool under the mountain breeze. That was where Remy Cole stood, sleeves rolled up, fingers smudged with dust and metal. One knee rested on the cold rock as he leaned into his drill, the bit whining against the fresh post he'd set that afternoon. The sign gleamed in the fading light, crisp white letters on powder-coated metal. Private Marina Access County Deed on file. He drove the last screw in, the drill biting home with a satisfying thrum. The vibration traveled up his forearm, into the old scars that still ached when the weather changed. He exhaled slowly, the way he had hundreds of times while double-checking a gate valve on a dam spillway. Measure twice. Bolt once. Make it so clear no one could pretend they didn't understand. He straightened, stretching his back. His old pickup sat parked on the gravel turnout at the end of the bridge, dust still clinging to its sides from the climb up the mountain road. Behind it, the narrow lane wound down toward the main subdivision, High Ridge Marina Estates, its perfect cabins lined up along the opposite shore like they'd been dropped from a catalog. The wind shifted, bringing the sound of laughter and clinking glasses from a deck somewhere on the far hillside. A couple of colorful kayaks drifted near the marina dock, tied off to posts that technically weren't theirs. Not anymore, Remy thought. He wiped his hand on his jeans and reached for the brown folder tucked under his arm. It was thick, edges worn from being handled too often in the last few days. Deeds, surveys, water rights, letters from the county. The kind of paper armor he trusted a lot more than anyone's opinion. He had just turned toward his truck when the tires on gravel broke the quiet. A white Lexus SUV swung into the turnout too fast, front tires spraying a fan of dust. The engine cut off in a sharp, annoyed click, and the door flew open before the sound had even died. He recognized her before she set both feet on the ground. Bethany Reed, always dressed like she was attending a board meeting inside a magazine cover. Tonight, it was a bright pink suit that didn't belong anywhere near a mountain lake. Sharp blazer, pencil skirt, heels that sank instantly into the gravel. A stack of glossy folders was wedged under one arm, her HOA badge clipped to her lapel like a medal. "You have got to be kidding me!" she shouted, voice slicing across the water. The kayakers turned. Ducks scattered near the reeds. Remy could feel more than see. Curtains shift in the cabins along the shoreline as people peeked out. Bethany jabbed a manicured finger toward the sign. The late light turned her face the color of her suit. "You take that down right now," she snapped. "You can't just steal our lake access and slap up some bogus sign. This marina belongs to High Ridge residents." Behind her, doors opened all along the road. A couple in hiking pants emerged from a Subaru. A teenager in a basketball jersey hopped off a bike, letting it fall to the dirt. Phones came out, screens glowing as they were raised like a wall of tiny glass shields pointed at him. "Is that the new guy?" someone whispered. "That's him. The one who bought the lake from the bank." "Unbelievable," another voice added. "He's shutting us out of our own shore." Remy stayed where he was, boots planted on the stone bridge. He adjusted the folder under his arm, feeling the reassuring weight of stamped seals and recorded numbers. He'd seen this look before, in different offices, different states. A developer angry about a cost overrun. A city council member who didn't like hearing that a dam had to stay closed for safety reasons. Power mixed with panic, shaken hard. This time it wore lipstick and a HOA name tag. "Evening, Ms. Reed," he said, keeping his tone level. "You almost took that corner a bit hot. Road's narrower up here than it looks." "Don't you dare try to be cute with me," she snapped, marching closer. Gravel crunched under her heels, each step a tiny stab of impatience. "You can't restrict community access to the marina. We've used this bridge, this dock, this entire shoreline for 40 years. You have no right." Behind her, more residents drifted in, forming a half circle just short of the bridge. About 30 people now. Some crossed their arms, tension coiling in their shoulders. Others simply watched, unsure, caught between the woman they'd elected and the man holding a folder of facts. Down the hill, the first patrol car turned into view. Blue and red lights pulsed against the pines, painting streaks of color across the watermill's wet wheel and the stone blocks under his boots. The cruiser moved slowly, tires humming over the rumpled gravel, followed a moment later by a second unit. Interesting, Remy thought. 2 cars. Somebody wanted a show. Bethany spun, waving both arms like she was directing traffic on a runway. "Over here, officers!" Her voice jumped an octave, shrill and righteous. "He's obstructing our community access. He's threatening residents. He's posting false signage to intimidate us. I want him removed from HOA property immediately." The word property scraped across his nerves. Remy lifted his eyes to the approaching units, then back to the people on the road. Half the phones were now pointed at the sheriff's vehicles instead of him, the crowd quietly buzzing. The smell of dust and cooling engines mingled with the faint, clean scent of lake water. The first cruiser rolled to a stop just off the road, crunching to rest behind Bethany's Lexus. The engine ticked as it cooled. A tall deputy with close-cropped hair stepped out, hat under one arm, flashlight still holstered. His name tag caught the light. Fletcher. The second car pulled in behind the first. A shorter deputy climbed out, older, with gray at his temples and lines at the corners of his eyes, moving with the careful calm of someone who'd seen enough to know things could go sideways fast if you let them. They took in the scene, bridge, sign, crowd, before the older one spoke. "Evening," he said, voice steady as the water behind him. "I'm Sergeant Dale Merrick. This is Deputy Fletcher. Somebody want to tell me what's going on before the sun disappears completely?" Bethany didn't wait to be invited. "Sergeant, thank you for coming so quickly," she gushed, stepping forward, hand pressed dramatically to her chest. "I'm Bethany Reed, president of the High Ridge Marina Estates Homeowners Association. This man," she swung around, pointing at Remy like he was a stain on a white carpet, "has put up an illegal sign, blocked our dock access, and is trying to claim our community marina as his own private property. He's agitating residents and trespassing on HOA-controlled land." Merrick's gaze shifted to Remy. Fletcher's did too. The younger deputy's eyes lingered on the sign, then the bridge, then the watermill. Remy felt the weight of 30 silent witnesses behind Bethany, their expectations pressing forward. He also felt the solid weight of the folder under his arm, edges digging into his ribs through the fabric of his flannel shirt. Calm, he reminded himself. This isn't a dam about to burst. It's just people who forgot what paper means. "Sergeant," he said, dipping his head in a polite nod. "Name's Remy Cole. I'm the legal owner of this lake, the watermill house, and this access road, including the bridge you're standing on and the marina down there." He jerked his chin toward the dock, where a pontoon boat bumped lazily against pilings. "I've got the deed, the county records, and the water rights right here." He patted the folder gently. A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone scoffed. Someone else muttered, "Legal owner? Yeah, right." Bethany laughed, sharp and humorless. He bought something on paper from a bank that never even came up here, she said. This lake has always functioned as common property. Our bylaws recognize it as community space. We have history, tradition. You can't just erase 40 years with a piece of paper and a Home Depot sign. Merrick's expression didn't change. Fletcher's jaw ticked slightly. I see a sign that says deed on file, Merrick replied. Mr. Cole, you say you've got documentation? Yes, sir, Remy said. County record number, surveys, federal, project notes, the whole story. I was planning on having a quiet evening, but I'm happy to share it. He slid the folder from under his arm, careful and deliberate, like he'd once handled blueprints that could flood a valley if misread. There was something grounding about the rustle of paper, the feel of embossed seals under his thumb. In a world of feelings and familiar routines, ink still mattered. Sergeant, Bethany cut in, voice tightening. With all respect, our community has used this marina since before this man ever drove his rusty truck up the mountain. Our residents park their boats here. Our kids swim off that dock. We collect fees for its maintenance. This is harassment. A murmur of agreement rose behind her. Someone called out, "Yeah, tell him, Bethany." Another added, "We're not losing our lake to some outsider with a lawyer." Remy let the words wash over him without answering. He watched Merrick instead, the way the sergeant's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly at the mention of collecting fees. Fletcher's gaze had drifted again to the stone by the watermill, where moss had been scraped back in a rough, fresh patch. The evening light continued to drop, shadows stretching long across the bridge. The air cooled, carrying the crisp scent of pine sap and damp stone. A slight breeze stirred Bethany's hair and fluttered the edges of the HOA flyers spilling from her folders. Merrick stepped forward onto the first stone of the bridge, boots scraping. He nodded at the folder in Remy's hands. "Mr. Cole," he said, "here's how we're going to do this. You're saying you've got legal title. Ms. Reed says you're on HOA property. Before anything else happens, I need to see what you've got, and I might need to verify it with the county. You okay with that?" "Absolutely," Remy said. Bethany took a step closer, almost between them. "Sergeant, this is unnecessary," she insisted. "We've already consulted our attorney. Our bylaws—" Merrick held up one hand, not rudely, but firmly. "Ma'am, I hear you, and we'll get to your side. But if this gentleman has a recorded deed, we're going to check it. That's how this works." The pink in Bethany's cheeks darkened. For a second, anger flickered into something else. Fear, maybe, or the realization that this wasn't going to be the quick public shaming she'd planned. Remy opened the folder and slid out the top document, the paper catching a beam of fading sunlight. The embossed county seal glinted faintly. He held it out without ceremony. Merrick took it carefully, like a man who knew the difference between a story and proof. Fletcher stepped closer to look over his shoulder. The crowd quieted, the subtle sounds of shifting feet and rustling jackets swamped by the hush of the lake lapping against stone. The only loud thing left was Bethany's breathing. Remy watched the sergeant's eyes move across the page. Legal. Description. Parcel number. Recorded date. Crystal Mill Lake and associated structures. Fletcher's brow furrowed when he reached the section about water rights. Merrick glanced up after a moment, his gaze a little more focused now. "This says you closed 2 weeks ago," he said. "You've already verified this with the recorder's office?" "Yes, sir," Remy replied. "I pulled the chain all the way back. Bank foreclosure, previous owner, federal transfer. There's more behind that first page." He tapped the folder. For a heartbeat, the mountains felt closer, the sky lower. The sound of a boat rope squeaking against wood seemed louder than it should be. Bethany's voice cut into that fragile quiet. "Whatever that paper says," she snapped, "it doesn't erase 40 years of community use. We have prescriptive rights. We have history." Our attorney said, Remy turned his head toward her, meeting her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. "Ms. Reed," he said calmly, "history doesn't beat a recorded title. And if your attorney told you different, you might want to ask how often he actually wins." A few people in the crowd sucked in breaths. Someone muttered, "Dang," under their breath. Bethany's lips tightened into a white line. Another flush climbed her neck. Merrick looked between them, then at Fletcher. The younger deputy cleared his throat. "Sergeant," Fletcher said quietly, "I'm going to call this in to the county, just to confirm it's clean. Shouldn't take long." Merrick nodded. "Do it." Fletcher stepped away, pulling his phone out, turning toward the view of the dam farther down the valley so the bars on his signal could fight with the mountains. The crowd repositioned, following him with their eyes like he was carrying the outcome in his pocket. Remy shifted his weight slightly, feeling the stone under his soles. The light was almost gone now, just a band of gold over the ridge tops, reflecting off the water and coating everything in a soft, unreal glow. The watermill wheel creaked once more, dripping steady as a second hand on a clock. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. What he felt was something heavier, a familiar mixture of tired patience and the old stubbornness that had kept concrete walls standing against floodwaters. They think they own it because they've acted like they own it, he thought. Long enough that nobody questions it. He'd seen dams built on assumptions before. He knew how those stories ended. Bethany folded her arms across her bright blazer, chin lifting. "You can flash that folder around all you want," she said, quieter now, but no less sharp. "High Ridge will not let some outsider fence off our lake. You picked the wrong community to mess with, Mr. Cole." Remy met her stare, the murmur of the lake at his back. "We'll see," he said simply, "once the county confirms who actually owns this bridge we're standing on." Above them, a matsu, single windmill on a distant ridge, turned slowly, its blades catching the last light as Deputy Fletcher lifted his phone to his ear and said, "Yeah, I need a quick verification on a parcel deed. Crystal Mill Lake owner listed as Remy Cole." The wind stirred again, carrying the smell of damp stone and pine needles, wrapping around 30 people, 2 cruisers, 1 sign, and a question hanging over the water like the last streak of daylight. Why was an HOA acting like they owned a lake a stranger had just legally bought from the bank? Above them, a single windmill on a distant ridge turned slowly, its blades catching the last light, as Deputy Fletcher lifted his phone to his ear and said, "Yeah, I need a quick verification on a parcel deed. Crystal Mill Lake, owner listed as Remy Cole." The wind stirred again, carrying the smell of damp stone and pine needles, wrapping around 30 people, 2 cruisers, 1 sign, and a question hanging over the water, like the last streak of daylight. Why was an HOA acting like they owned a lake a stranger had just legally bought from the bank? 72 hours earlier, there was no crowd, no pink suit, no patrol cars. Just a conference room that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. Remy sat at the end of a scratched oak table, a stack of papers in front of him, a ballpoint resting in his hand. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Across from him, the loan officer flipped through a manila folder. Late 60s, thinning gray hair, glasses slipping down his nose. The brass nameplate read, "Clifton Harris, First Summit Bank." "All right, Mr. Cole," Clifton said. "Purchase agreement and water rights transfer for parcel CR51 Lake, also called Crystal Mill Lake. You've gone through it all?" "I have," Remy said, "more than once." "And you still want it?" Clifton asked. "Lake, Millhouse, Access Road, what's left of the marina. Once this goes over to the recorder, there's no easy way to pretend it didn't happen." Remy glanced at the top sheet again. The number beside purchase price still made him blink. "For a whole mountain lake, Mama, he said. "This is cheap." "For a whole mountain lake with 3 decades of angry neighbors attached to it?" Clifton said. "That's about right." He let the pages fall shut. "You're buying into an argument," he said. "The HOA down at High Ridge Marina Estates has been treating that shoreline like their clubhouse since the 80s. Boats, cookouts, newsletters with pretty pictures of our dock. Bank foreclosed on the last owner. We've held title ever since. Every few years somebody thinks they want to own a lake. Then they meet the HOA. Do they have anything recorded?" Remy asked. "Easement? Right-of-way?" Clifton opened the folder again and slid a thin bundle across the table. The photocopies were yellow at the edges. "County correspondence," he said. 3 different boards over 20 years asked for recognition of long-standing community access. County council told them the same thing every time. No easement, private parcel, access at the owner's discretion. In 2003, they tried prescriptive easement. Council wrote back, "Claims unfounded." Remy skimmed the pages. The language was dry, but the meaning wasn't. "So on paper," he said, "they've been told no for decades." "And kept using it anyway," Clifton said, "every summer, and blaming the bank whenever anyone asked who owned it." He flipped to the back of the bundle and pulled out a faded survey map. A small sticky note clung to one corner. "Did you notice this?" he asked. Remy took the map. Black ink marked the narrow valley, the curve of the shoreline, a square for the watermill house. A thin line crossed the neck of the lake. Stone bridge. A dashed road ran down from the ridge. On the note, in cramped letters, someone had written, "See 1951 Federal Mill Project. No public easement unless recorded." "What's the 1951 project?" Remy asked. "Before there was a subdivision," Clifton said, "Army Corps and the county drew up plans for a small emergency reservoir. Mill for power, lake for backup water. They built the mill, set the boundary stones, and then the money dried up. In '55, they handed it back to the county with a condition: no public access unless it's formally recorded." "And nobody ever recorded anything," Remy said. "Not once," Clifton replied. "Private owners all the way. Last guy got old and stopped coming. The HOA mistook silence for permission." Remy let his eyes stay on the map. In his mind, the flat lines turned into pines and rock, and cold water curling around stone. Bridge, mill, docks, everything inside one parcel, the one on the table. "I spent 20 years telling people they couldn't cut a spillway because it might kill somebody downstream," he said. "Concrete doesn't care about politics. Land doesn't either. Either the title says what it says, or it doesn't." He set the map down. "This one does." Clifton studied him, then nodded. "In that case," he said, pushing the stack toward him, "sign here, and here. Initial these. Once the recorder stamps it, Crystal Mill Lake is yours. Docks, bridge, shoreline, angry neighbors, and all." The pen felt light in Remy's hand, but each stroke of ink landed with weight. Remington J. Cole. Final signature. Final initial. Clifton gathered the documents, tapped them into a neat block. "We'll walk this over to the county in the morning," he said. "You'll get certified copies tomorrow. Just don't be surprised when High Ridge comes knocking. They've convinced themselves the bank would never actually sell it." Remy slid his copies into a brown folder, the paper stiff and cool under his fingers. "I'll be home," he said. Outside, the air smelled of distant rain. He drove out of town, past the feed store and the fire station, then up the 2-lane that climbed between pines. With each turn, roofs dropped away and the mountains rose higher. The first glimpse of Crystal Mill Lake appeared between the trees, a sliver of turquoise against dark green. As he wound higher, the view opened. The lake lay in the valley ringed by pines and cabins. On the far shore, docks reached into the water, small boats and kayaks bobbing. The old watermill sat at the neck of the lake, sluice spilling white water beneath the stone bridge. Closer to the road, at the split where the access lane dropped toward the mill and marina, A sign stood that did not belong to him. High Ridge Marina Estates, private community lake and marina residents, and guests only. The post was fresh set. The HOA logo shone at the bottom. Remy eased the truck onto the gravel turnout and let it idle. The lake glittered beyond the sign, indifferent to the words printed on metal. He reached over and tapped the folder on the passenger seat, feeling the raised county seal through the cardboard. "Paper beats paint," he murmured. He shut off the engine, stepped out into the cool mountain air, and walked toward the unauthorized sign. The sound of distant laughter drifting up from the docks, and one thought settling like a stone. If the law had been this clear since 1951, what made the HOA so sure they could ignore it? Remy eased the truck onto the gravel turnout and let it idle. The lake glittered beyond the sign, indifferent to the words printed on metal. He reached over and tapped the folder on the passenger seat, feeling the raised county seal through the cardboard. "Paper beats paint," he murmured. He shut off the engine, stepped out into the cool mountain air, and walked toward the unauthorized sign. The sound of distant laughter drifting up from the docks, and one thought settling like a stone. If the law had been this clear since 1951, what made the HOA so sure they could ignore it? He paused a few feet from the sign, studying it the way an engineer studies a warped pressure gauge, calm on the outside, calculating on the inside. The sign's face gleamed with fresh enamel, corners sharp, not a hint of rust. Someone had planted it less than a week ago. The footing was still loose. The soil around the post gave slightly when Remy nudged it with his boot. Below the large block letters declaring Private Community Lake, a series of smaller ones read, "Maintained by High Ridge HOA trespassers subject to fines." It was the word trespassers that made his jaw tighten. Whoever printed that sign was confident enough to warn the actual landowner off his own property. A gust of wind swept across the gravel, carrying the scent of wet stone and gasoline from boats drifting near the dock. He lifted his chin and took in the view below. Kayaks in bright reds and yellows bobbed at the marina's edge. A couple tied their pontoon boat to the outer slip, laughing as they clattered a cooler onto the dock. Kids chased each other along the planks. On several cabin decks across the water, people leaned on railings to enjoy the last of the afternoon sun. Not one of them looked toward the access road. Not one seemed to imagine that the land under their feet might not belong to the HOA that governed their lawns and trash cans. A small group of residents stood gathered near the marina shed. 3 women, a man in a fishing vest, a teen wearing earbuds. One of them pointed toward Remy's direction. Heads turned, so they already knew someone had touched their sign. Remy rolled his shoulders once and headed back toward his truck. This wasn't the place to make a scene. The deed didn't need defending with words. It already defended itself. He drove down the mountain and parked outside the county administration building. The sun had dipped behind the ridge, leaving the street bathed in cool blue shadows. The recorder's office was quiet, just a lone clerk shutting down her computer for the day. Remy lifted the brown folder. "I need to confirm recorded status," he said. The woman took the document as if she had done this 1,000 times, and maybe she had. Her fingers danced across a keyboard, glasses slipping down her nose. "Crystal Mill Lake, parcel CR51 Lake. Yes, sir." She tapped the screen. "Deed recorded this morning at 9:14 a.m. Clean transfer from First Summit Bank." "Any easements?" Remy asked, though he already knew the answer. "None recorded." She clicked through another page. "Actually," she leaned closer, squinting. "There's a note from the county attorney's office from 2003. Says the HOA attempted to register a prescriptive easement. Denied. Lack of statutory requirements." Remy exhaled through his nose. "So they knew." "Seems like it," the clerk replied. She handed the papers back. "You own that lake, Mr. Cole. on paper and in fact. Outside, the evening air felt cooler, sharper. Remy tucked the folder under his arm and headed for the truck. The windows reflected the deepening sky, streaked with purple and fading gold. As he opened the door, a faint electronic chime sounded from his phone. He pulled it out. A message from an unknown number. Are you the person putting up new signs at the Mill Lake access? You're going to start a war you can't win. No name. No number he recognized. Just a warning sent from a blocked contact. He saved the message, screenshotted it, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. When he reached his cabin that night, the lights of High Ridge Marina Estates twinkled faintly across the water. Their docks were strung with yellow bulbs that reflected off the glassy lake's surface like a necklace laid across dark velvet. Remy pulled his freshly made sign, the legitimate one, from the back of his truck. He leaned it against the porch railing. Private Marina Access. Deed on file. He traced the letters with his fingertip. A breeze rustled the pine needles overhead. Somewhere near the shoreline, a bullfrog croaked a slow, steady rhythm. Tomorrow, he said quietly. We'll see what they do tomorrow. He woke before sunrise, brewed a pot of coffee, and strapped the sign into his truck bed. He drove back to the lake, the road crunching beneath his tires, mist rising from the water like thin silver smoke. At the stone bridge, he positioned the new sign where the HOA's sign once stood. The bridge stones were damp under his boots, the morning air cold enough to bite. Drill, bolt, level, repeat. When he stepped back, the sign stood firm and clear in the first rays of sunlight. He didn't expect what he saw when he returned later that evening. The sign was gone, ripped clean off its posts. The wood was split, the bolts sheared. Deep footprints scarred the mud on either side, heavy and deliberate. Beyond the bridge, near the watermill, a group of residents had gathered. Their voices carried across the water, sharp fragments of conversation carried by the wind. Can't believe he thinks he owns it. Bethany will take care of him. We should have pulled the sign out sooner. Bethany herself was there, clipboard in hand, directing volunteers as they hammered a new wooden board into the ground. Community access authorized by High Ridge HOA. Remy stood at the end of the bridge, his jaw tightening. Not from anger. Anger was easy. This was calculation, pattern recognition, the same way he had once studied the stress lines on a concrete spillway during spring thaw. Someone tugged at the thread of truth. Someone else yanked back harder. The sun dipped behind the ridge, turning the lake to burnished copper. Shadows stretched long across the water as the wind picked up, rattling the needles of the pines. Remy stepped forward, his boots steady on the stones. The HOA wasn't just ignoring the law. They were doubling down. He crossed the bridge slowly, the weight of the moment settling into the arches of the old stones beneath him. The air had shifted, thicker now, charged the way a sky feels just before lightning. Bethany's volunteers drifted away from the newly planted HOA banner, though several lingered close enough to listen. One of them whispered something sharp under her breath. Someone else snorted, "He thinks he can fight us." Remy didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth wasn't in the noise. It was under the moss, in the paper he carried, and in the history nobody had bothered to read. He turned toward the watermill, its wheel churning slowly, sending thin streams of droplets into the dusky air. The building stood on thick wooden stilts driven deep into river rock. A faint hum came from inside, like a memory of machinery long abandoned. It had once been an early experiment in off-grid power, part of the federal mill project the banker had mentioned. Now it was only scenic unless what Remy suspected was true. He knelt beside the mill foundation, where a rounded stone jutted from the earth. Thick moss covered most of it, soft and damp under his fingertips. But the edges looked too even, too deliberate, too purposeful for a naturally placed boulder. Someone had once carved this. He brushed away more moss, grains of sand clinging to his knuckles. The fading twilight caught on a faint line, then another, like a pair of horizontal scratches running across the stone. He dug deeper, scraping away a wet layer of green. And there it was. CM 51, he breathed. Not paint, not marker, not graffiti. Carved, deep, weathered, real. A faint crest, a bird's head, maybe an eagle, sat beneath the letters, eroded but recognizable. Remy leaned back on his heels. So the federal marker wasn't just a rumor buried in a dusty memo. It was right here, a few feet from the watermill. A piece of the boundary line the Corps would have set when defining the original site. The HOA hadn't just been mistaken. They had been operating on land with a federal history they never bothered to understand. Footsteps crunched behind him, heavy ones, purposeful. "Evening again," a familiar voice said. Remy turned his head. Deputy Marcus Hale stood at the edge of the bridge, the last of the orange glow catching in the silver threads of his hair. He'd parked farther up the road, cruiser barely visible behind the pines. His expression was neutral, but his eyes, always a little sharper than the average deputy's, were focused on the ground near Remy's feet. "That marker," Marcus said quietly. "When did you find it?" "Just now," Remy replied. "It caught my eye. Thought it might tie to the federal transfer log from 51. Marcus exhaled slowly, almost like someone remembering something they didn't expect to revisit. "Well," he said, "that answers my question from earlier today." Remy stood, brushing moss off his palms. "Which question?" "When you asked why the HOA acted like they owned this place," Marcus said, lowering his voice. "Truth is, they don't know what they're standing on. Most folks don't. The old-timers used to talk about this mill project, how the government surveyed every inch, how the county took it back with strings attached. Strings like no public access unless recorded," Remy said. Marcus nodded once. Exactly that string. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of lake water and cedar. The distant sound of kids shouting came from the marina as someone pushed off in a kayak, paddles slapping the surface. Marcus stepped closer to the stone. "You know what this marker means legally?" he asked. "I know it means the original boundary line predates every house across that water," Remy replied. "And I know if the Corps used federal markers, then the property chain is airtight." "It means more than that," Marcus said. His voice had changed, lower, firmer. "It means the county can't pretend this was ever public, and the HOA can't claim ignorance. These markers were documented, filed. They're part of the federal withdrawal notes." Remy studied him. "You sound like a man who's read those notes." Marcus gave a short, dry laugh. "I have. My father worked for county engineering. He kept old surveys in the garage. I used to trace them for fun." He paused, eyes drifting toward the crowd, slowly dispersing near the dock. "Ms. Reed won't see it this way. She thinks tradition is stronger than title." "I'm not here to fight tradition," Remy said. "I'm here to enforce the law." "That's good," Marcus replied. "Because you're sure as hell gonna need the law before this is over." A woman from the marina shouted Bethany's name, waving a clipboard. Bethany shot a final glare at Remy, gathered her volunteers, and marched off toward her Lexus, heels striking hard against the gravel. Marcus watched them leave before turning back to Remy. "They'll push back. Hard. You're not just stepping on toes. You're pulling out the foundation stone of their whole story, the one they've told themselves for 40 years. "I've handled worse," Remy said. "I don't doubt that," Marcus replied. "But understand this. When people believe a lie long enough, they'll defend it harder than the truth." A hush settled over the lake shore as the last light drained out of the sky. The windmill on the distant ridge spun slowly, blades whispering against the mountain air. Marcus rested his hand briefly on the carved stone. "You need to keep digging," he said. "If this marker survived, there are documents that survived too. Somewhere in the archives, maybe in the county basement." "I plan to check there first thing in the morning," Remy said. "Good." Marcus backed away, boots crunching across the stones. "And Remy?" "Yeah? If you find what I think you'll find, this won't just be a property dispute." He paused, voice dropping to a murmur. "It'll be a reckoning." The deputy walked toward his cruiser, the red taillights casting long shadows across the gravel. The engine hummed to life, headlights washing over the bridge and glinting off the freshly hammered HOA sign. Then he drove away, leaving the sound of water rushing past the mill wheel and the faint echo of a warning that clung to the night. Remy remained beside the marker, fingers curling around the cold stone, the engraved letters rough against his skin. The lake reflected the first stars as they blinked awake across the darkening sky. Tomorrow, he would open the county archives. Tomorrow, he would find out just how deep the truth ran. But tonight, standing on land he unquestionably owned yet still had to defend, he realized something with absolute clarity. The HOA hadn't just doubled down, they had declared war on the truth. Morning came with a low curtain of fog draped over Crystal Mill Lake, soft and silver, like the world hadn't quite finished waking. Remy sipped his coffee on his porch, watching mist curl around the ridgelines, the stone bridge barely visible through the haze. The watermill wheel turned slow and steady, droplets falling like ticking seconds. He finished the last swallow, grabbed the brown folder, and headed for his truck. The drive down the mountain was quiet, just the hum of tires on damp pavement and the steady clunk of his wipers clearing early dew. Pines leaned close along the canyon road, their branches brushing overhead like whispers urging him forward. By the time he reached the county complex, the clouds had lifted, revealing a crisp blue sky. The building was older than most around it. Brick, thick-walled, windows narrow and tall. A plaque near the door read, "County Administration, Eastern 1912. He stepped inside. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Footsteps echoed along hallways lined with framed maps of the region, topographical lines, water systems, outdated fire zones. He found the elevator and rode it down to the basement, a faint draft slipping through the crack of the doors as they closed. The basement was cooler, the air tinged with the faint, comforting smell of paper and dust, the smell of history still breathing. At the end of the hall sat the archive office, a glass window with a call bell. Remy tapped it once. A voice floated from the back. "Be right with you." A moment later, a woman stepped out, a law clerk in her early 40s with reading glasses perched halfway up her head. Her nameplate read, L. Carter. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "What can I help you dig up today?" "Crystal Mill Lake," Remy said, setting the folder on the counter. "I need full historical records, parcel history, federal projects, boundary surveys, water rights, anything referencing Mill Project 1951 or any federal transfer notes." Her eyebrows went up. "That's a big bite." "I'm hungry," Remy said. She chuckled, motioning him through the side door. "Come on in then. Let's see what we can find." The archive room was larger than he expected, rows of metal shelves stretching into cool shadows, boxes stacked neatly, each labeled with decades and department codes. A few ceiling lights flickered softly, aging bulbs fighting for relevance. Carter led him to a long oak table under the brightest lamp. "Start with this," she said, pulling 3 thick boxes from a nearby shelf with practiced motions. County water records, land transfers, and federal correspondence we keep for historical context. Should be something in here about that mill project. It predates most of our modern subdivision filings. She left him with the boxes, promising to return once she finished a call upstairs. Remy sat, the metal chair cold beneath him, and opened the first box. Inside were folders stamped in faded blue. Federal Water Reserve System, Crystal Mill Project, 1951 to 1955, declassified. He lifted the first folder and spread it open. The paper crackled, soft at the edges, but the ink was clear enough. A memo dated July 12, 1951, outlining the establishment of an emergency water reserve connecting Crystal Mill Lake to a larger network of small mountain reservoirs. Halfway down the page, highlighted by a crease that had resisted time, one line read, "No public access permitted unless an easement is recorded with the county registrar." Remy exhaled slowly. The wording matched what Clifton hinted at, but seeing it here, in black and white, gave the phrase weight, authority, finality. He flipped through another document, a survey map drawn by federal engineers. The lake was outlined in precise strokes, with coordinates marking the shoreline, the mill, and, near the bridge, the exact symbol he found carved in the stone. CM51, the eagle crest. The boundary marker wasn't decorative, it was official. He turned another page, a memo from December 1955, transferring the lake back to county ownership after the federal project was defunded. Again, the condition was clear. No public easement recorded. Parcel to be treated as private property until such recording occurs. Remy leaned back, rubbing a thumb along the document's edge. The weight pressing on his chest wasn't fear, it was confirmation. He had expected something, but not this much clarity. Box 2 held county communications, letters typed on thin, aging paper that carried the sharp scent of old toner. He scanned through the years. 1977. HOA requests recognition of long-standing community use. County reply. No easement, no authority granted. 1983. HOA claims customary rights. County reply. Custom is not equivalent to legal permission. 1990. HOA cites decades of continuous recreational use. County reply. Private land, no recorded access rights exist. 2003. HOA attempts prescriptive easement. County Council reply. Claim unfounded, statutory requirements unmet. Every decade, the HOA had pushed. Every decade, the county had said no. The third box contained maps, layers of history stacked like sediment. Contour lines, inked water boundaries, adjustments logged in neat handwriting. One map caught his eye, a hand-drawn revision from a county engineer in 1953. Near the stone bridge, a note read, "Federal markers remain intact, boundary unquestionable." He closed the map gently. Carter reappeared, sliding a cup of water onto the table. "Looking like you found something important." "More than something," Remy said. "This proves ownership all the way back. And not just private ownership, federally documented boundaries. HOA never had a claim." "Some folks don't like letting go of stories they've been telling themselves for years," she said kindly. Remy nodded, his eyes returning to the papers. "This isn't a story. It's a set of facts they don't want to accept." A soft ringtone buzzed against Carter's hip. She excused herself, disappearing around the corner. Remy reached into his folder for his phone, snapping photos of the most important pages. The basement light flickered overhead, buzzing faintly as if paying attention. When he had captured what he needed, he closed each box carefully. But just as he reached the third, a sealed envelope slid slightly out of place. He pulled it free. No notary stamp. No date. Just an old typed label. To be kept with mill records. County Directive 1951 Water Project Supplemental Notes. Remy opened it slowly. A single paragraph sat centered on the page. As part of the Crystal Mill Water Reserve Initiative, markers were set. These shall constitute permanent, legal indicators of parcel boundaries. Their presence overrides any later claims based solely on tradition or unrecorded use. He let out a slow, steady breath. This wasn't only evidence. It was a final nail, one the HOA couldn't talk their way around. He slipped the copy into his folder, returning the original to the envelope. As he locked the boxes back in place, Carter reappeared with a clipboard. "You done for today?" "For today," Remy said. "But I need certified copies sent to the county attorney." She nodded. "I'll take care of it." He climbed the basement stairs, folder tucked under his arm. Outside, the sunlight felt warmer, the air clearer. As he reached his truck, he paused, taking in the view of the distant ridge. The truth wasn't just deeper than he thought. It was older, stronger, etched in stone and ink long before anyone in High Ridge Marina Estates was born. And tomorrow, when the HOA found out, everything would shift. But tomorrow arrived sooner than he expected. When Remy returned home, the mountain dusk had settled across Crystal Mill Lake like a soft blanket, though it did nothing to soften the cluster of HOA residents standing near the bridge. Their silhouettes were dark against the copper glow of the water, their voices tense and animated. He didn't approach. Not tonight. Not with the truth still gathering inside him like a steady rising tide. He parked the truck beside his cabin, grabbed the folder, and headed indoors. The wood floors creaked beneath his boots, the smell of cedar mixing with cool nighttime air drifting through an open window. He set the folder on the kitchen table, but before he could even open it, his phone buzzed. Unknown number again. This time the message was different. "If you want to know how deep this really goes, come see me. JM address attached." Remy stared at the initials. JM Jake Mercer. He knew the name. He'd seen it buried in one of the county letters, a treasurer listed on a 2001 HOA filing, the only board member from that decade who apparently resigned without explanation. The address lay 15 miles up the North Ridge, past a narrow switchback that twisted toward a collection of rustic cabins, far enough that only people who wanted to disappear chose to live there. He slipped the phone into his pocket. He didn't sleep much that night. The wind rattled faintly against the siding, and every so often, the distant creak of the watermill wheel drifted across the lake like an old machine dreaming of work. By dawn, he was back in his truck. The road up the ridge was tight, hugging the mountain like a spine, with crisp morning air whipping against the windshield. Pines narrowed overhead until the sky became a thin silver ribbon. He spotted the cabin just past a bend. Weathered wood, tin roof, chimney puffing thin stalks of smoke. A stack of chopped logs sat neatly by the porch. Remy parked and stepped out, boots crunching frost-coated dirt. The cold bit at his cheeks, sharp enough to wake every nerve. He approached the porch, but didn't need to knock. The door opened before he reached the steps. Jake Mercer stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, but eyes steady and sharp. He was in his early 60s, with sun-browned skin and hands that looked like they'd split more firewood than typed emails. His flannel shirt hung loose over jeans patched at the knee. "You got my message," Jake said. "I did," Remy replied. "Then come in before the cold steals the breath from your lungs." The cabin was warm, lit by a small wood stove in the corner. Papers lay stacked neatly on a long table. Newspaper clippings, old HOA newsletters, printed emails, minutes from meetings, all of it labeled. Organized. All of it damning. Jake motioned for Remy to sit. He didn't offer coffee, and Remy didn't ask. The air didn't need filling with anything but truth. "You bought the lake," Jake said. "Finally, someone actually bought it." Remy nodded. And now the HOA is acting like I took something from them. Jake gave a long, tired exhale. They've acted that way for 40 years. I was on the board for 7 of them. You resigned. Because I couldn't stomach what they were doing. Jake reached for a folder on the table, one thicker than the rest, bound with an aging rubber band. He slid it across the table. Remy opened it. Emails dated from 1998 to 2003. Bethany's name appeared again and again. So did phrases highlighted in yellow. We control the lake through custom residents expect us to act like owners. Nobody will challenge us if we look confident. Remy turned a page. Another email, this one from Jake himself, dated March 2001. We cannot keep collecting marina fees. County Council says we have no legal standing. This is fraud if we continue. Below it, Bethany's reply. Residents don't need to know the legal details. We maintain access and appearance. That's enough. Remy lifted his eyes. She knew. All of them knew. Jake nodded slowly. Every single board member from that era knew the truth, especially after the county attorney sent us a memo spelling everything out. But Bethany, she was different. She believed that if she said something loudly enough and long enough, it would become real. And the others? They liked the power. Jake's voice cracked slightly. Not emotion, just old disappointment resurfacing. And the praise. Thank you for protecting our lake, our marina. They were treated like royalty for something they never owned. He reached for another document. This one a spreadsheet, printed on thin bank paper. Rows of numbers marched down the page, year after year. These are the fees we collected, Jake said quietly. Marina maintenance, boat storage, dock insurance, all on land the HOA had no right to use. Remy ran a thumb along the column totals. Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. He closed the folder gently. Why come forward now? Jake lowered himself into the chair opposite him, fingers lacing together. You found the marker, he said. The CM51 stone. Word spreads fast in this valley, and someone mentioned you brushing moss off a rock by the mill. He paused. That marker is real federal work. I always hoped someone would find it. Why didn't you tell the county? Remy asked. Jake gave a soft, humorless laugh. I was tired and Bethany threatened to sue me if I spoke publicly. Said she'd ruin me. People believed her. I didn't have the stomach to fight the machine she'd built. He leaned forward. But you do. The room went quiet, except for the faint crackle from the wood stove. Outside, a hawk screeched somewhere far up the ridge. Jake reached into a drawer and pulled out a flash drive, placing it between them like an offering. This has everything, he said. Copies of all the emails, meeting minutes, financials, my resignation letter, the one the HOA never released to residents, proof they knew they were lying. Remy stared at the drive. Small, unassuming, but it felt heavier than steel. You should take this to the county attorney, Jake said. What you found in the archives makes your deed airtight. But this, he tapped the flash drive, this makes their behavior criminal. Remy closed his hand around the device, the metal warm against his palm. Thank you. Jake nodded, eyes softening. Do what I couldn't. Make the truth stick. Remy stood, tucking the drive into his folder. When he reached the porch, he paused, looking out over the ridge. The lake lay far below, a glimmer of turquoise framed by pines. Jake stepped beside him. You should know, he said quietly. Bethany doesn't back down. When she realizes you've got proof, real proof, she'll fight harder. Remy watched a breeze ripple through the treetops. Let her, he said. I'm not fighting her. I'm fighting for the truth. He walked toward his truck as frost began to shimmer on the grass. For the first time since buying the lake, Remy felt something more than frustration or patience or stubborn resolve. He felt vindicated. And tomorrow, when the flash drive 5 met the county attorney's desk, the reckoning would begin. By the next afternoon, the mountain air had warmed, but a sharp tension still clung to Crystal Mill Lake like static. Remy parked in front of the county administration building, its stone steps shining in the midday sun. People milled around outside. Residents, reporters with small handheld cameras, and more HOA members than he expected. The Whisper network in High Ridge Marina Estates worked faster than wildfire. He stepped inside. The hallway buzzed with voices bouncing off marble walls. The county hearing room was already half full, the air tight with anticipation. Windows along the far wall framed a view of the lake valley, ridge after ridge fading into blue, the watermill just barely visible in the distance. At the front, Commissioner Gideon Pierce arranged papers at the dais. Tall, silver-haired, steady-handed, Pierce had presided over 40 years of local disputes, but nothing quite like this. Beside him sat the county attorney, Sarah Mitchell, flipping through a binder of documents Remy had delivered earlier that morning. She nodded once when she saw him enter. Not a greeting, but an acknowledgement. A silent, "Good. You're here." Rows of chairs filled quickly. HOA members packed the right side, many wearing matching navy shirts with white lettering. "Save our community, Marina, protect our rights." Bethany Reed stood at the aisle end, clipboard tucked tight against her ribs, her bright pink suit even louder under the fluorescent lighting. She didn't look at Remy directly, but her jaw was clenched hard enough to cut stone. The left side held curious locals, a few retirees, some hikers who probably just wanted a break from trail dust, and scattered reporters already setting up tripods. Remy took a seat near the middle. The room lights dimmed slightly as Commissioner Pierce tapped his gavel. "This hearing is now in session," he announced. "We are here to address a dispute regarding the ownership and access rights associated with Crystal Mill Lake and its surrounding structures." The room quieted instantly. "We will hear from both sides," Pierce continued, "beginning with the High Ridge Marina Estates Homeowners Association." Bethany rose smoothly, as if this were a telecast she'd rehearsed. Her heels clicked sharply on the polished wood floor as she approached the podium. "Commissioners," she said, her voice warm yet trembling with practiced outrage, "thank you for allowing our community to speak today." She clicked her remote. A slide appeared on the projector behind her. Photos of families swimming, birthdays held on the dock, kids in kayaks, seniors fishing at sunrise. Soft instrumental music played over the speakers. Someone on her board clearly knew how to tug heartstrings. "For 40 years," she continued, "this lake has been the heart of High Ridge. Our children learned to swim here. Our volunteers maintained the marina every summer. Our community events rely on this shoreline." She turned, gesturing to the photographs. "This is not just a body of water. It is our heritage. And now one man, one outsider, has decided he alone owns it." Murmurs rippled through the HOA. Someone whispered, "Tell them, Bethany." Bethany lifted her chin. "We claim prescriptive rights. Decades of continuous, open, unchallenged use. That is the law in this state." She clicked again. Legal text appeared on the projector, bold, highlighted, as if she knew half the room wouldn't read it anyway. "And therefore," she said, "we ask the county to recognize our historic access and prevent Mr. Cole from blocking the marina or the bridge." She stepped back, eyes glinting with satisfaction. Commissioner Pierce nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Reed." He turned his gaze toward Remy. "Mr. Cole," Pierce said, "you may present your side." Remy rose, folder under his arm, Jake Mercer slipping quietly into the seat behind him. He could feel the weight of 30 cell phones turning toward him, recording every step he took toward the podium. He set the folder down. "Commissioners," he said, his voice steady, "thank you for hearing this." He clicked his remote. The projector changed, not to smiling faces, but to a crisp, scanned federal memo from 1951. Thick black ink, typed signatures, the eagle emblem of a government office that no longer existed. "This," Remy said, "is the beginning." He read the highlighted line aloud, slow enough for the weight of each word to land. No public access permitted unless an easement is recorded with the county registrar. A whisper passed through the audience, different from Bethany's chorus of support. This whisper carried something colder. Doubt. Remy clicked again. A 1955 transfer document appeared, stamped declassified, outlining the return of the lake to county ownership. "This parcel has always been private," Remy said. "Every transfer since 1955, every deed, every survey, has identified Crystal Mill Lake as a single, continuous property, and not one easement, not one right-of-way, has ever been recorded." He clicked again. A photo of the stone boundary marker, CM51, took over the screen. The carving filled the room with its silent authority. Federal engineers placed boundary stones around the lake. They remain today. The HOA built their traditions around them without ever understanding what they meant. Murmurs grew louder now, uneasy. A few heads turned toward Bethany. She stiffened. Remy clicked again. A series of letters flashed on the screen. County replies from 1977 to 2003. Each one stamped with the same finding. No easement, no rights. Private property. Commissioner Pierce leaned forward, interest piqued. "And finally," Remy said, his voice level, "we have these." He opened the folder and lifted a printed email, one of many Jake had provided. Dated March 2001, he read, "County Council says we have no legal standing. Recommend ignoring. No one will challenge us if we continue to act like we own it. Bethany Reed." Gasps cracked across the room like a breaking branch. Someone from the HOA section said, "Wait, what?" Bethany's face lost a shade of color. Remy lowered the paper. For decades, the HOA collected fees for a marina they never owned. They threatened residents. They used community money on property that was never theirs, and they knew the truth. Jake rose quietly behind him. "Commissioners," he said, stepping forward at their gesture. "My name is Jake Mercer. I served as HOA treasurer from 1998 to 2005. Everything he's saying is true. I tried to warn the board. I resigned because they ignored the law and misled homeowners." Bethany's voice broke through, sharp as glass. "This is outrageous. Jake, you were barely involved." Pierce struck the gavel, silencing her. "Ms. Reed," Jake continued, steady as a man finally freed from years of shame. "They lied, and residents paid the price." The room erupted. Shouts, disbelief, accusations, cameras flashing. The commissioners spoke hurriedly among themselves. Pierce raised the gavel again. "Order!" The room quieted. After a long breath, Pierce said, "The evidence is clear. Crystal Mill Lake is private property. No easement exists. The HOA had no authority and knowingly misrepresented its rights." Bethany slumped into her seat. "Effective immediately," Pierce continued. "The county recognizes Mr. Cole as the sole legal owner of Crystal Mill Lake, the stone bridge, the Marina Road, and all associated structures." He paused, letting the words settle. "And per the documents provided, this matter will be referred to the sheriff's office for investigation." The room broke open again. Stunned gasps, scattered applause, HOA members turning to each other with confusion and anger. Sarah Mitchell approached Remy, offering a subtle nod. Commissioner Pierce added, "This hearing is adjourned." The gavel struck once, echoing like the crack of a distant tree falling. as the crowd surged to their feet, some stunned, others furious. Remy gathered his folder and stepped away from the podium. Jake squeezed his shoulder gently. "You did it," Jake whispered. Remy shook his head. "No," he said softly. "We just started the real fight." The words proved true before he even reached the parking lot. Outside County Hall, a crowd had already formed. Neighbors, reporters, HOA members, and curious onlookers who'd caught wind of the drama. The sun had dipped lower behind the mountains, throwing long amber streaks across the steps. Microphones thrust toward him like reaching branches. "Mr. Cole, is it true the HOA committed fraud? Do you plan to sue them? Will the lake be closed permanently? What happens next?" Remy kept walking, offering no comment, no fuel for the fire. The truth already had momentum. It didn't need him pushing it faster down the hill. Jake shuffled beside him, overwhelmed by the lights and noise. "Good Lord," he muttered. "Bethany always said media wouldn't care about local matters. Guess she was wrong about that too." Remy almost smiled. Almost. At his truck, he paused. Across the lot, Bethany Reed stood surrounded by her board members. Her pink suit no longer looked bold or confident, just loud and out of place among the dark coats and serious faces. She was speaking quickly, hands flying with the frantic motion of someone trying to rebuild a collapsing argument. When she noticed Remy watching, she froze. Her expression wasn't anger this time. It was fear. And that told him everything he needed to know. He drove home in silence, the county lights fading behind him. Shadows grew long across the winding road, stretching like fingers through the pines. The lake came into view just before dusk, quiet, still, almost indifferent to the chaos swirling around it. But Remy felt the shift. He wasn't alone anymore. The truth now belonged to more people than just him and Jake. Inside the cabin, Remy set the folder on the table. The wood smelled faintly of pine sap and old varnish. He poured himself a glass of water, but before he could drink it, his phone buzzed. "Sarah Mitchell," he answered. "Yeah? We need to meet tomorrow morning," she said. "The sheriff wants your full statement. You should know they're opening a criminal investigation." Remy leaned against the counter. "Already?" "Evidence moves fast when it's this clear," she replied. "Between the emails, the financials, and the county's own history, it's enough to freeze their accounts." "Freeze? It's happening right now," she said calmly. "By morning, the HOA won't be able to access a dime." Remy let out a slow breath. The reckoning wasn't coming. It had arrived. When he finally slept, the wind rattled the window frames like quiet reminders. Justice might have wheels that turned slowly, but tonight, they seemed to turn a little faster. The next morning, he walked into the sheriff's department just as the sun crested the ridge, painting the parking lot gold. Sheriff Dale Merrick met him at the door, broad-shouldered, early 50s, with steady eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 local disputes. "Mr. Cole," Merrick said, shaking his hand firmly, "let's get this done." They sat in a small interview room, pine-paneled walls, a metal table, a faint hum of the building settling around them. Remy placed the flash drive and folder on the table. Sheriff Merrick opened them carefully, turning each page with deliberate, measured focus. After 10 minutes, he closed the binder and leaned back. "This is bad," Merrick said quietly. "Real bad. I figured. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, possibly falsifying financial reports." He tapped the spreadsheet Jake had kept. "This shows years' gushers of collected marina fees. And the emails." He shook his head. They knew exactly what they were doing. "And the stone marker?" Remy asked. Merrick nodded. "The county engineer verified it yesterday. It's authentic. That marker locks the boundary. There's no argument, none." A long silence settled between them. Finally, Merrick stood. We'll be interviewing board members today and tomorrow. Charges may come soon after. You should brace yourself, Mr. Cole. For what? For the fallout, Merrick said. Some residents will blame the HOA. Some will blame you. Truth is, you didn't cause this. He paused. But you exposed it. And that's enough to stir up a storm. By the next afternoon, the storm had a name. The county treasurer froze all HOA accounts. The local newspaper ran the headline, HOA fraud exposed, unauthorized fees, illegal claims. Overlake debunked social media amplified it. A Facebook group sprang up that same night. High Ridge Accountability Coalition. Within an hour, it had 200 members. By morning, 500. Posts appeared rapidly. They lied about owning the marina. I paid fees for years. For what? Bethany better answer for this. Remy wasn't the villain. They were. The wind had shifted, and suddenly, Remy wasn't the outsider anymore. But the fallout wasn't done. By the weekend, the HOA called an emergency meeting in their community hall, a wooden lodge with wide beams and a view of the lake. Over 100 residents packed inside, some standing along the walls. Voices buzzed like agitated bees. Remy did not attend. He didn't need to. Jake, however, did, and he called Remy afterward. Bethany tried to defend herself, Jake said. She said you forged the documents. Remy closed his eyes briefly. Of course she did. But then someone read your email from 2001 out loud, the one where she told the board to ignore the law. Jake let out a low breath. The room went dead silent. And then? And then Russell Blackwell, the HOA attorney, stood up and said he couldn't represent them anymore. Remy straightened. He quit? He walked out, Jake said. He said he was misled by his client. A quiet beat followed. After that, Jake continued, the board held a vote. And? Bethany was removed. 90% voted against her. Remy let the weight of that settle. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. Something like closure beginning to form around the edges. But the final blow came 2 days later. A letter appeared in Remy's mailbox. White envelope, county seal. Inside was a notice. Sheriff's Office. Criminal investigation initiated. Subject. High Ridge Marina Estates Board. Potential charges. Fraud. Misappropriation. Unauthorized collection of fees. Property damage. Bethany Reed's name was printed first. Remy folded the letter slowly, the paper crisp beneath his fingers. Justice had begun its march, and the lake, the quiet, shimmering, unmoving witness to it all, seemed to reflect a new stillness, a peace earned through conflict, not granted with ease. Yet despite everything that had happened, one question lingered like a shadow at the water's edge. Now that the HOA had fallen, what would Remy do with the power he had won? The next few days passed like slow-moving clouds across a high ridge, calm on the surface, but shifting underneath. Some residents came to the lake to apologize, quietly, awkwardly. Some stopped their cars at the stone bridge just to wave at him from a distance. Others walked the marina shoreline, their faces conflicted, unsure what to believe anymore. But Remy didn't make announcements. He didn't claim victory. He installed no new gates. He simply lived his life, cutting firewood, repairing the railing on his porch, tightening bolts on the old watermill wheel. And every afternoon, he walked down to the stone marker by the bridge, brushing pine needles off the carved letters as if tending a grave of forgotten truth. Then, one crisp morning, his phone buzzed. Commissioner Pierce, he answered. This is Remy. Mr. Cole, Pierce said. We need you at County Hall this afternoon. We've reviewed the situation with council. There's an opportunity on the table. Opportunity for what? Come at 2, Pierce replied. And bring your deed. The call ended. When Remy arrived, the parking lot was empty except for Pierce's truck and an old county sedan. The wind carried the scent of wet stone and distant snowfall. Inside, the halls were quieter than during the hearing, quiet enough that his footsteps echoed as he approached the conference room. Sarah Mitchell was already there, her binder open, tabs neatly arranged in color-coded rows. Pierce stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Cole," Pierce said, offering a hand. "Thank you for coming." Sarah gestured toward a chair. "This won't take long." Remy sat. "What's going on?" Pierce cleared his throat. "We've been reviewing your case and the fallout. The HOA is effectively leaderless. Membership is fractured, and residents are confused about whether they'll ever be able to use the lake again." Remy didn't respond. He let the commissioner continue. "So we're proposing something that could stabilize the situation," Pierce said. "Something legal, transparent, permanent." Sarah slid a document across the table, thin, freshly printed, bearing the county seal. Remy read the title: Proposed County Recorded Public Access Easement Crystal Mill Lake, Secondary Roadway. Sarah leaned forward. "This would give the public access to the lake from County Road 14, not from your land. No HOA involvement, no fees, just a simple right-of-way recorded properly, the way it should have been 70 years ago." Pierce added, "The county will fund the small parking area, signage, and maintenance. In exchange, you receive a property tax credit." Remy set the paper down gently. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. He had expected many things from this fight: anger, pushback, frustration, and maybe eventual peace. He had not expected this. Pierce watched him carefully. This agreement would give the community access they never legally had, and take the burden of policing trespass off your shoulders. Sarah folded her hands. "It's the cleanest path forward, and it makes the truth permanent." Remy reached for the document again, reading each line slowly, deliberately. No tricks, no hidden traps, just clarity. "Why now?" he asked. "Because the lake shouldn't suffer for the HOA's mistakes," Pierce said quietly. Remy nodded once, understanding more than the commissioner realized. The lake had never asked to be part of a fight. It had simply existed, honest, constant, waiting for someone to treat it with the respect it deserved. He exhaled. "I'll agree," he said, "on one condition." Sarah looked up. "Which is?" "Record it," Remy said. "File it. Make it real. No unofficial practices, no oral understanding, no handshake agreements. It needs to be as solid as the stone marker at my bridge." Pierce smiled faintly. "We wouldn't have it any other way." Remy reached for the pen, the weight comfortable in his hand. As he signed the page, he felt something shift in the air, like the lake exhaling with him. Not victory, resolution. The signing took only minutes. The implications stretched further than any of them could fully grasp. Pierce stood. "We'll notify the public tomorrow. Prepare for questions." "I'm ready," Remy said. As he left County Hall, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps. A distant windmill turned slowly on the ridge, blades catching the light. The lake shimmered below, quiet, waiting. And for the first time since he bought the lake, Remy felt no tension in his shoulders. No weight pressing down on him. Just clarity. That evening, as he walked the shoreline, the water reflected the colors of the descending sun. Gold melting into rose, rose fading into violet. A kayak glided idly past the far bank, its paddler unaware of the transformation unfolding behind the scenes. Remy paused at the stone marker. His hand rested on the carved letters, CM51, still solid. still certain. Tomorrow, the truth would become more than history. It would become law. And the lake, after 70 years of confusion, claims, and conflict, would finally belong to everyone in the way it was meant to. Not through force, not through lies, but through clarity, transparency, and one recorded easement that no one could ever twist again. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a gentle breeze drifting off Crystal Mill Lake, carrying the scent of cold water, pine sap, and something almost like renewal. Remy stood on the shoreline early, long before anyone else gathered. The sun had only begun to crest over the snowy peaks, laying soft golden light across the water. The mill wheel turned lazily, dripping sunlit beads back into the lake. He breathed deeply. The air felt lighter today. By 10 o'clock, cars lined the new county access road, a gravel path carved neatly through the pines, ending in a small parking lot that hadn't existed a month earlier. Families stepped out with folding chairs. Kids carried bright kayaks on their shoulders. Elderly couples walked slowly toward the ribboned gate, hands clasped, as if they'd waited their whole lives for something like this. And in a way, they had. Commissioner Pierce stood near the podium adjusting his notes. Sarah Mitchell arrived next, dressed in a simple charcoal blazer, her calm expression softened with a rare smile. Volunteers placed small signs near the shoreline. Public access authorized recorded county easement open 6 a.m., 8 p.m. Remy stayed back near the stone bridge as the last few attendees gathered. The ridge windmill spun gently in the distance. Boats rocked in the shallows like restless horses waiting to be let loose. Then he heard the microphone test, Pierce tapping it lightly. "Folks, we'll begin in just a moment." Remy made his way to the podium, Jake Mercer falling in step beside him. Jake looked healthier now, lighter, as if a weight had been taken off his shoulders. "You ready for this?" Jake asked. Remy smiled softly. "Yeah, I think I am." They joined the crowd. Pierce stepped up, clearing his throat. "Good afternoon, everyone. Today marks an important moment for our county, our community, and our shared history." He gestured toward the shoreline, the new path, the lake, the mill. For 70 years, Crystal Mill Lake has lived in a state of confusion. Ownership misunderstood, access misrepresented, community trust compromised. But today, with cooperation, honesty, and a commitment to transparency, we correct that. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. "This easement," Pierce continued, "ensures public access while respecting private property. It replaces decades of conflict with clarity, and it honors the truth that should have guided us all along." He nodded toward Remy. "And we would not be here without Mr. Remy Cole." The crowd turned. Some applauded. Others simply nodded. But not a single face carried hostility now, just recognition. Pierce motioned him forward. Remy stepped to the microphone, the lake glittering behind him. "I didn't buy this lake to keep it from anyone," he said. "I bought it because it was abandoned, because it had history worth protecting, and because the truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable." He glanced toward Jake, who lowered his eyes with quiet gratitude. "A lot of people were misled," Remy continued, "but that wasn't the community's fault. And today isn't about blame. It's about doing things the right way, the legal way, the honest way." He rested his hand on the podium. "This easement isn't charity. It's justice." A hush fell over the crowd, not dramatic, but respectful. Sarah Mitchell approached with the document, the embossed seal shining like glass under the sun. She held it up. "For the record," she said, "Crystal Mill Lake Public Access Easement has been recorded with the county registrar, effective immediately." The crowd erupted in gentle applause. Commissioner Pierce lifted the ceremonial scissors. Mr. Cole, he said, would you do the honors? Remy stepped forward, fingers curling around the scissors handles. The ribbon fluttered lightly in the breeze, almost weightless. For a brief moment, he thought of the weeks behind him, the shouting on the bridge, the accusations, the vandalism, the hearings, the lies brought into the light. Then he cut the ribbon. The ends drifted apart, and the crowd stepped through as if crossing into a new chapter. Families moved down to the water. Kids splashed along the shoreline. A kayaker launched from the new gravel ramp. A fisherman cast his line near the mill where early trout often circled, and above them all, the mountains reflected cleanly in the turquoise water. Sarah joined him at the bridge. You did a good thing today. Feels strange, Remy said, like the lake is finally breathing again. She nodded. The law works best when people respect it. You did. He didn't respond, just watched the water shimmer as sunlight danced across the surface. A moment later, Jake approached, hands in his pockets. I never thought I'd see this, he said softly. You helped make it happen, Remy replied. Jake shook his head. I just told the truth. You carried it the rest of the way. They stood together, listening to the sounds of families enjoying the lake. No shouting, no threats, no HOA clipboards. Just life, just peace. An older woman walked up the path and paused at the stone marker. She brushed a leaf from the carved numbers and smiled. I always wondered what that meant, she said. Remy answered gently. It meant someone had a plan for this lake long before any of us. Now we finally honored it. She nodded and continued toward the water. As the afternoon stretched into evening, the crowd slowly thinned. The breeze cooled, and Remy remained on the bridge, watching the lake settle into its familiar, quiet rhythm. For the first time since he'd arrived, nothing felt tense or uncertain. The fight was over, not with a dramatic final blow, but with a ribbon cut, a document filed, and a lake freed from decades of confusion. Justice didn't roar. It whispered. And as Remy finally turned toward home, the last lines of the day, glinting across the water, he understood something deeply. Justice isn't loud. It's the quiet that remains when the truth finally surfaces. If you've ever had to stand your ground the way Remy did, drop a simple yes in the comments, or just type justice if you believe the truth always finds its way to the surface. Stories like this remind us that owning land isn't just about dirt and water, it's about dignity. And if you'd like more real, cinematic HOA and ranch justice tales, I'd be honored to have you subscribe and stay with us for the next fight for what's right.